starting with Mr. Lamarca. Introduce yourself and then answer the question, what do you think are the most important solutions at the state level to address sea level rise and flooding?
Thank you, Tom. My name is Chip Lamarca. I'm a Broward County Commissioner representing coastal Broward County District 4, which goes from Deerfield Beach down through Port Everglades. And why that's important, as well as District 93, is a similar footprint on the coast, as it represents about 74% of Broward's beaches. And as was said by some of the other folks earlier, a significant amount of Broward County's economy is driven by our tourist economy. A significant amount of our tourists, about 2/3 to 3/4, spend time on our beaches. If we have no beaches and we have no coastal environment, as well as what's out in the ocean and in our reefs, people are not going to come here. So it's an economic issue, but what can Tallahassee do? There was a little bit of confusion prior, but the Amendment 1 dollars that I believe were being talked about was the issue that was voted on a few years ago at 70+% approval, and it's been what I would consider held hostage in Tallahassee by the majority party. That's what same party as I'm in, but the issues that are not being addressed with Amendment 1 dollars are our environment. It's our beaches, our water, and protecting and preserving and purchasing additional land. So I think Tallahassee has a place to do it. I don't think you need a new tax. I think there's plenty going in through the dock stamps in Amendment 1. So that would be the first thing that I would say that we could use to address it. And separate from that, I think what was started by my former colleague to my left and continued through the commission now is the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact has proven to, number one, come up with some great solutions, but more importantly, get people engaged in the conversation. I would like to think that most folks are past the idea of denying anything that's going on. If they are at that point, they can come down to Riviera Isles in Fort Lauderdale on a good dry day when we have a king tide and stand there in your rubber galoshes and then tell me we don't have things changing in the environment.
Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Is it on? Wow, chips. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Jacobs. I am the representative in District 96. I was a Broward County Commissioner and Mayor for 16 years before I got to the state, and I am what I guess I sometimes call the mother of the Southeast Climate Change Compact. I've been engaged in these issues for a very, very long time, and in particularly on the state level, coming to the state 4 years ago to understand what it is that we are facing here in South Florida. We're not unique. These issues are happening all over the state. If you go to St. Augustine and talk to Mayor Shaver, you'll find what's happening here is also happening there. If you go to the Panhandle, to Tampa, to any other community around Volusia County, they're dealing with the same issues of sea level rise. We are also all dealing with the issues of our coral reef system, which, as Chip said, is not only a great source of our tax dollars and our tourism, but it is also our first line of defense against storms and extreme weather. As our coral reef system is in trouble, it is one of the reasons why I was so excited to pass the bill that was referenced earlier today. That was my bill that took the marine conservation area of the Keys and extended it from the dry Tortugas all the way up to the St. Lucie Inlet. It is one of many things that we have been doing in the state to address these issues. The final comment I would make about things that we need to be doing, and that is the way that we fund these projects. If you consider that the governor vetoed almost every single water infrastructure project that came before him, not just in this legislative session, but in those prior, that would be a great starting point. If you also consider that we are not funding the Coastal Resiliency Office, this year we were able to get $2.6 million in that office and another $1 million for monitoring that new area of the coastline. But it's surely not enough. We need to put more money into solving these problems, and I see that my time's up, so we'll reserve the rest of this question for later.
Ms. Williams.
Hi, I'm Patricia Hawkins-Williams, District 92, and I am running for re-election because a lot of things that we started in this session, I would like to continue on and be the voice of so many don't have a voice for themselves. And as Representative Jacobs stated there, we need to have additional funding. This is not a new problem, and it's not going to be solved by anybody just saying this is something we need to do. the state needs to pull together, have a line item itself and fund some of these projects that need to be done here in Broward County to make sure that we are getting the money that we need to make awareness of the problem so that everybody understands what's some of the problems that's going on and how we can fix the problem. You can't fix the problem without funding, and additional funding is definitely needed.
Mr. Farmer.
Hello.
There you go. Hello.
All right.
Big time.
It's great when we can master technology, isn't it? I always get excited when I can complete a conference call. It's such a great feeling in the company. I want to pick up on something that Commissioner Lamarca said. You know, denial is not just a rising river in Egypt. Denial has multiple levels. And to a great extent, we are still in denial as a state when we have a state agency, Department of Environmental Protection, that is not allowed to even talk about or recognize climate change when working on and implementing a myriad of plans, legislative requests, funding, whatever it may be. And so, unfortunately, in a day and age where I don't think you can debate the cause at all, but even if you want to debate man's contribution to rising sea levels, there's no question that the sea levels are rising. And as a state, under this governor, I hate to say it, we are in denial as to that reality. And we are a peninsula, we are surrounded by water, we are being impacted by climate change more so than any other state in the country. I guess I should have started off, I am Gary Farmer, I represent Senate District 34. That district encompasses all of the coast of Broward County, from the Dade County line all the way to the Palm Beach County line. It is, I think without question, the prettiest district in the state of Florida, but it is also the district that encompasses all of our coastline. And so we must recognize the reality. And with that recognition will then come the funding that we've talked about. We have not, as a state, done anything, and I mean anything, in a meaningful way to provide funding for our counties or municipalities to deal with these realities. It has been left to the local level for way too long. And that is just us shirking our state and legislative responsibilities. Now, we can seek those fundings, and Rep. Jacobs and I worked on funding for the coral reef preservation, and we can seek little bits and pieces of it. But until we, as a state, collectively recognize the need for that infrastructure funding, our communities are going to struggle, and we're going to feel the impacts.
Okay, Ms. Farooqui.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to bring our point across. My name is Saima Farooqui, and I'm running for State Representative District 96. My district consists of cities Coconut Creek, Coral Springs, Margate, Parkland, and Pompano. In fact, like, my district does not have any coastal area, but climate change and sea rise level is a big issue and a big concern for me, because we live in Florida, and average sea level is like about 6 feet. So this issue is not something that we can really neglect or we can really push behind. So we have to make sure that we talk about that and educate people, and especially, like, we talk a lot, so it's not about just talking. We need to implement things, and we need to be very environmental conscious, so we can just eliminate global warming and the causes that they are the big issues for the sea rise. So once again, my name is Saima Farooqui, running for State Representative District 96.
Okay, Mr. Lamarca, question number 2. What efforts, if any, would you champion in the state legislature to pay for sea level rise and flooding resilience efforts?
Excellent question, thanks, Tom. So one of the things I do want to add on to what my state senator had mentioned, not completely true that Tallahassee hasn't been involved in funding some of our projects. Broward's Segment 2 and soon to be Segment 3, as well as the sand bypass, beach renourishment projects and shore protection projects have received about 25% of their funding from the state. So I'm very, very proud of my state representative in working on those dollars. I think if you look at sea level rise issues, you had mentioned sea walls, infrastructure like that. All of those projects, in my mind, as a state representative pushing this, would be that those are infrastructure projects. They should be in the FDOT work plan. They should be funded as any other infrastructure project that we have in the state of Florida. Because without sea walls in a low-lying area, you're not going to have roads. So it's going to ultimately become a DOT problem. Thank you.
So when we look at the state, it was interesting hearing some of the comments tonight about ideas that we ought to be doing, but over everything we think about what we would want to do is the reality that you have 41 Democrats in a House with 120 members, and anything that we're going to pass is going to have to pass with their blessing and the blessing of the other chamber, and sometimes that's really difficult. What we do when we move forward is to find that common ground, and that common ground is when we have a conversation about the economy, where we're investing these dollars makes sense for the state of Florida. If we continue to turn it into an economic conversation, we can move legislation as we did in this last session. The answers include additional funding. We need additional funding for shoreline protection. We need additional funding for those cities and counties that are working on their infrastructure. We need funding for LiDAR mapping that maps the entire state to show us where we're vulnerable, and we need to be able to provide expertise to those cities and counties that currently don't have very sophisticated staff, but are addressing these issues, are concerned about these issues. They just don't have the personnel in order to get it done. That's an obligation of the state to help our local governments.
Ms. Williams.
Bringing awareness, not just back to the cities that we serve, but also the awareness in the State House. We have people that we serve with that still don't want to even take into consideration that we have a problem. Additional funding is needed for infrastructure. The awareness that we have is not enough. We need to bring it to the forefront. It needs to be something that we pound on day after day after day to actually get these things done. When we are serving, we have different people that's in charge of different committees. And if we are not the person that putting forth these bills, a lot of times they won't get heard. So if we put them forth and they're not being heard, you won't never get any funding for it.
It goes way beyond beach renourishment. I mean, we're all in favor of beach renourishment. We do have a tourist-based economy here, so even if you don't feel you have that moral, social obligation to preserve our coastline as best we can, it is an economic issue for us. But it's even more than that. I mean, when we talk about infrastructure, what are we talking about? We're talking about things like our water supply, okay? The intrusion of salt water into our aquifer, into our pumps, has caused us to have to shut down pumps year after year after year. Broward County is actually especially susceptible to this loss. We have closed and will close more pumps than our friends down in Dade County will have because of just where they are located and it's so close to the coast. So we continue to move things out west. Where are we going to get this water? We have the most unique water supply in arguably in the country. We don't have these rivers flowing through our upper. We have this underground aquifer that we must protect. And I think that's number one issue, is to protect that water supply from further saltwater intrusion.
So improving infrastructure is one of the things that we should be looking into, but people talk about funding and funding and funding. It is a big thing for the funding, but why can't we look into the things that the problems and the corporations that are causing these issues, and instead of always blaming on funding, why can't the politicians and lawmakers can just impose extra taxes on those companies and corporations that are causing these issues and polluting our environment? So I know funding is a big thing, but we have to look into what we have, and we try to impose things that are just, okay.
Okay. Mr. Lamarca, this is only tangentially related to sea level rise, but the person took so much time to write it and is so passionate about it. Ask the question anyway. All right? It says, as you are aware, individual homeowners with solar panels are required to remain connected to the FPL grid even after a storm such as Irma, stopping them from using solar power while the broader grid is out. This has been posited as a safety issue that homeowners can bypass by upgrading to battery-powered interactive system. Considering such a system can cost upwards of $10,000 beyond solar panels themselves, how do you propose making such systems more accessible to homeowners such that individuals can work toward their own energy independence? Did you get that?
I did.
All right.
Background is actually power generation and construction in that area. So what's interesting is, so there's two issues that are being debated or concerned with solar power. One is why should someone, if they want to be quote unquote completely off the grid, why should they have to pay anything to the utility? Well, there's got to be an access to a utility, just like our water system. If you're not using water, you're still paying a convenience fee. So in that situation, batteries are part of solar. I don't know that that's completely true because you charge in the daytime your battery system and power the house. I would say that as somebody who supports solar and works in Broward County for the county, we like to create policy that encourages solar. But I don't see solar on one single building. That Broward County has done 5 new buildings since I've been there. So I'm a big advocate, and I'd like to see us actually walk the walk.
So there's a program, it's called Property Assessed Clean Energy, or PACE, and it is approved in Broward County and most of the counties in our state, and it is an opportunity for homeowners to be able to afford improvements such as solar, such as improving the straps on your roof, as your hurricane windows. There's all kinds of things that fall under PACE financing. And the way that it works is, once the property is assessed for these improvements, it doesn't just stick with that one property owner, it runs with the land, just as an improvement to your sidewalk or your road would be assessed to your home. As owners change, they pick up the cost. So it allows homeowners to make these really expensive improvements to their home, like solar and like hurricane-resistant windows, and not have to do it all out of one person's checkbook, but to understand that future property owners will continue to pay for this so that it lasts longer than the average turnover of properties, which is around 7 years, and can stretch these costs out to about 20 years. So it's a really exciting thing. It's something I championed as the county, and actually had a bill last year to improve the safeguards for our homeowners as they would apply for these programs. And it's a bill I'll bring back in the next session.
And if not mistaken, I think you can get finances from that, and you can also get additional tax breaks once you have those things put in place to save money. So it's a plus for us to go into this program, because not only are we saving money, we are improving the property that we're in, and it goes from year after year after year.
And my colleagues raise a great point on PACE, and I think it's largely unknown to a lot of consumers out there, and I think we probably should do a better job of advertising those opportunities to people, because I've been at forums before where it's been brought up, and so many people are totally unaware of how much help there is out there. But that original question was really directed more towards utilities and how we can better implement solar. And we saw it in the last election, where one amendment was defeated, largely because of millions of dollars put into it by the power companies to defeat the amendment. And then another amendment was passed that arguably had some pretty misleading language in it. I just have never seen an area where, for one group in particular, free market seems to be the nirvana. But then you have these exceptions, and solar is one. Medical marijuana is now another, but it's funny how free market's great for everything, except when it's going to affect the big dog who has all the market share.
We live in Sunshine State, so for solar energy, we have a bigger source, and it is very good to implement that, and we do have programs that would benefit homeowners, and it's going to go along like years after years for homeowners. So I would say like getting advantage and taking advantage of solar energy and then having those panels, that's really beneficial for homeowners as well, and then residents of the state of Florida.
Okay, coming back from that end, from the far end, let me ask this question from the audience. Would you support statewide building codes for resilience against sea level rise? Ms. Farooqui?
Can you please repeat the question?
Sure. Would you support statewide building codes for resilience against sea level rise?
Yes, I would. Any legislation would be in support of helping the climate change issue and the sea rise level issue. I would be in support of that. As I said, like we live in Florida and it's all like beaches. To preserve our beaches and work towards the climate change preservation, I would support all the legislation come through.
Yeah, I mean, the devil's in the details, and because for the most part, I do sort of favor local rule over state-generated mandates. We are such a diverse state. We're really kind of like many different states, if you break this up. But on this issue that affects all of us and is so critically important, and especially going back to the issue of saltwater intrusion into our water supply, I do think the time has come where we need the state to step in and say, listen, we're going to set these minimum standards, and you've got to meet these, and you've got to address these things. Whether it's mandating funding for some more resiliency infrastructure, whether it's setting codes as to the heights in which things are going to be built. I think too many communities are too willing to turn their back on that issue, and so I think, sometimes the parent has to be the parent. I think we're there on this issue.
I will support a statewide building code initiative. We had before the hurricane started years ago. I served on several boards, and I worked for the city of Pompano, and we used the South Florida Builder Code book. Everything that was built at that particular time had to follow those codes. So if we put something in place statewide, it will help. Yes, I will support.
So this issue is a lot more complicated than we have a few minutes or whatever to talk about, but I want to make sure that you all understand that we do have a statewide building code, and we have the South Florida Building Code, which was passed after Hurricane Andrew, and it was strengthened, and the rest of the state complained greatly that they didn't want to adopt the South Florida Building Code, but in fact, we have it, and we have one of the strongest codes now in South Florida than anywhere in the country. The issue, though, is that if you look since Hurricane Andrew, even with these codes in place, only 30% of the existing housing stock has been built under this new resilient code. 70% of the properties are still sitting out there needing to be improved, which is why the PACE program was created to help bring more properties up to resiliency. The issue for our state is to understand that resiliency comes in many ways across our state. It isn't just a coastal issue. Palm Beach County, 35 miles inland, last year had 2 1 in 1,000 year rain events. They were underwater for 2 weeks because of infrastructure and the inability to drain out their canals. So we have a lot more issues that we need to deal with just the building code.
I would say that everything you just said, I agree with Kristen. Maybe this is our time together for 4 or 6 years on the county commission, but my background, 31 years, is in the building industry, and we do have a state building code. I'm a very much a local control, home rule person as a county commissioner and a local government person. But this is one of those issues that, as much as our state is much different in the north than it is in the south and central, even different building construction. There are stick-built or wood-built framed homes in Tallahassee where they're not down here. That being said, we definitely need to make sure that we have a code. Look, at the end of the day, this becomes an economic issue too, and I appreciate you worked on some issues with Kristen in the legislature, that you find common ground on issues instead of this worrying about reaching across the aisle and having the same thing happen that happens in Washington. You have to work across the aisle. You have to find the common ground, and a lot of times it's the economic issue. And if we have a bad storm that hits 42 counties again, guess who's going to be paying the freight other than the federal government for a lot of the rebuild of those homes? So it's really an economic issue as well, so I support it.
Okay, Chip, going back, starting with you again, I'm going to combine two questions here. Somebody from the audience asked, what happens when it becomes too expensive for the state and federal governments to pay for adaptation measures? And there's a question here on the original sheet. What happens when there are a large number of climate refugees who have to migrate to different areas of the state, as parts of South Florida and Tampa and Jacksonville all become uninhabitable? How do you deal with those situations?
Very, very interesting two questions. Different, but have some commonality. And so I'll say on the first part, with regard to what do you do if the federal and state level governments can't afford adaptation? Well, I've been long in favor of a national catastrophic fund. And why I bring that up is prior to 2008, or when we had Sandy, 2012, prior to that, Florida was known for those 18 storms in a short period of time, 5 years, and nobody in the country wanted to join our investment in repairing after things like that. But at the end of the day, if you look at every state in the union, there is some type of natural disaster, natural catastrophe that's going to happen there. We can spread the risk around the country. We also have the issue as far as adaptation. We have the flood.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds more. I doubled up.
Our federal flood program is not funded properly. If everybody that is in a flood zone had flood insurance, it would spread the risk out. IQ flood program, I would go to that website and start looking at what can happen if we don't deal with adaptation. So ultimately, that's going to be everyone's issue anyway.
So I would say that Irma gave us an example of what happens when everyone picks up in one side of the state and moves to another. Didn't that happen all across our state? We have almost 1 billion claims in one state from one storm. So when we look at the issues facing our state and our federal government, hiding your head in the sand, the cost of doing nothing is the highest cost that we can pay. We know that every dollar that we invest brings back $7 in resiliency, so it also stimulates the economy. I don't believe for a second that this area is going to be quote-unquote uninhabitable. We drained the Everglades. Look what engineers did to create some of our problems that we're existing today. We can certainly engineer our way out of a lot of these problems, just as we engineered our way in. The issue is the political will and the smarts to understand what we do now, what we invest in now, will change the direction of the future. You hear some people say from the top part of the state, why should we do things to help South Florida? They're going underwater. And I want to say, well, South Florida represents 1/3 of the state's GDP and 1/3 of the state's population. You need us to be thriving. These are the dollars that fund the efforts of the rest of the state.
Bringing in expertise, people that is well-versed and know how to get things done. In order for us to be able to stay on a even field, playing field, is to be able to understand and be aware of some of the things that's going on around us. And in order for us to be able to do that, we all have to work together to make sure that we can get these things done. Saying Democrat or Republican, whatever, independent, whatever it is, this is what we are. We is in this together. All of us working together, putting our heads together to make things happen is what's best for the United States at this particular time.
A couple of points I was going to make have already been made. I think, Kristen hit on it, Rep. Jacobs hit on it. The ostrich approach hasn't worked for us. We've been ignoring this problem, pretending it wasn't happening for far too long, and that has put us in a hole that's going to require a little bit more drastic policy to get out of that hole. Commissioner Lamarca is correct that we've lost our way a little bit on the whole issue of flood insurance and catastrophic insurance in general. Risk is supposed to be borne by greater communities. The more we spread the risk, the more affordable it is to everyone. And whether it's tornadoes in Oklahoma, hurricanes hitting New York City, extreme extreme weather events happening everywhere with much greater frequency, I think there's a growing recognition that we're all at greater risk for these types of catastrophes. And so we got to pool that risk together to make it more affordable. I'm going to hit on one more point. As much as maybe the people in Coral Springs like the idea of being new beachfront property, I think that one of the things we have to look into is affordable housing. If the land mass is shrinking on which people can live, we need to move. We need affordable housing.
Someone finally had the cowbell.
That's all right, that was good. That, went almost 30 minutes, no cowbells.
I don't think I got the full minute.
Well, whatever. Here we go. Fine.
Hello? So ignoring the fact that, denying the climate change is not going to solve the problem, we have to look into proper infrastructure and to avoid any future problems which comes during the hurricane season or any other environmental disasters. Hello? So there was a study in 2017. It says that almost 100 companies has caused almost 71%. Hello?
You want this one?
Hello? Yeah. Do I get my minute? Okay. So we have to make sure that the things that they're polluting our environment and causing these bigger issues, that we have to make sure that we are eliminating those factors. As I said, like the study has, there was a study in 2017 which almost 100 companies has caused 71% carbon emissions. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I would like to say that I'm a proud employee of a company which by 2020 they would be eliminating 60% carbon emission by eliminating their fleet and switching towards electric cars. And
there you go. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, let's round of applause for these candidates for State House, State Senate, and final 30 minutes